Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me, John, and colleagues to share with you some new innovations and ideas that I think just hearing the introduction about the movement for community-led development and your intention for transformational scale, I just know that we're aligned. I mean, that's really like the source of these ideas. So, and quickly, the message really is, as you know, it's global goals for local impact. If we're going to ever get close to achieving these goals, we need to do what you're doing, and we need to ramp it up in a wide scale fast. We only have 13 years left, as we were just saying. So that seems like a lot of time, but it's moving quick, So next slide. So I'm going to give you a quick update on the SDG Sustainable Development Movement from my perspective, what I see is going on, then talk about this SDG Compacts 2020 concept that we're going to do a deeper dive in. What is it? Who could be involved? Why? And what are some of our next steps? And then if we have time, I can go into some more detail about some of the key features of this work in terms of the data revolution, financing, innovations, and potentially blockchain. And also, I do have a 2-pager, which I gave out to the people in the room, but John can make that available to the email list as well as the PowerPoint. Feel free to share this. This is open fodder. And really, I'm really excited to, this is like early stage ideas. And so having your organizations and your expertise help us create this, that's the invitation, from the get-go. So next slide. I think you all know this. We've transitioned from the MDG era into the SDG era. It's a very different paradigm. It's universal. It's social, economic, and environmental goals. I'm so excited because it's the first time in human history we have a framework for achieving social, economic, and environmental justice that's integrated and holistic. I mean, humans never did that before.
Yes.
I mean, it's like sort of amazing. Anyway, investment is broader now, not just donor driven, but it's public and private. We have to go from the billions to the trillions. There's a lot of work going on around that. And of course, the data situation is totally different. No data or lagged, slow data to real-time dynamic data. We're in that transition now. And of course, as you all know, and you're at the front line of bringing everyone on board. So that's an exciting broad thing. Next slide. I think you know the global goals. I'm not going to spend time on that. Next slide. And I think most people know this as well, that there are 169 targets and there's 240 indicators, and there may be more. I think they're up to 245 or something. So, there is this mantra, we can only achieve what we can measure at some level. But we know it's a lot more complicated than the actual indicators. And this indicator framework is actually really complex. The United States is only able to report on 80 of the 240 indicators. So if you think about like poor countries with weaker data systems, we have to really think seriously about how do we adapt this? How do we prioritize this? How do we make this relevant to the communities and stakeholders that you're engaging with? So how do we do that is the question. Next slide. I think this is an important slide coming up. And many people know this, but I think it's really important to repeat it as much as possible, is that a vast majority of the SDG targets align with the commitments that are being made under the Paris Climate Agreement, the NDCs, or the nationally determined commitments. I think that we have to really bridge the gap between the climate movement and our sustainable development movement. And your community-led development movement is sort of like the opportunity where all this has to come together. As you know, there's like global silos and there's national silos of different stakeholders trying to do things. We need to connect and align whenever possible. And that has to happen from the bottom up and from the top down and in the middle. So next slide. So what are the constraints to SDG action at the local level? Now, we know that cities and local governments have many ongoing plans that are supporting sustainable development. all the programs that you're all involved in, they're actually underway. And that's also actually contributing to sustainable development. As I said, it's going to be challenging, it is challenging for cities and local governments to prioritize, adapt this complex agenda that we love, but it can be overwhelming. There's also a lack of political will, and there aren't really incentives for aligned investment and aligned action. And that's really the heart of the matter that we're trying to explore solutions to. And as you can imagine, the data revolution, is lagging behind what is needed and what is possible. On the one hand, the systems, the data systems, and so forth. On the other hand, the smartphone and the cell phone and the smartphone revolution is moving fast. So poor countries now, or middle-income countries, are seeing high levels of cell phone, and smartphones are going exponential. So that's a game changer for what we want to get done in the world. And the reality is, right now, very few time-bound commitments to the SDGs have been made at the local level. Meaning, we have a goal framework. What do we want to get done by some time, like say 2020? 2020 is 38 months from now. Okay, so the December 31st, 2020 is only 38 months from now. We didn't
bring you here to depress us.
No. No, I'm the energizer catalyst. Yeah, exactly. I'm the time matters. Yeah. Like, let's just say what we want to get done by 2020. You know, and then see what we got done. This is coming up in the next slide. I'm not keeping up with you.
I appreciate the reality check.
Yes, no, it's very, very good.
Yeah. So, solutions. How do we change the game? How do we get that transformational scale? I mean, those words, I'm going to poach them from your slide if you don't mind.
Sure.
So SDG compacts are envisioned as agile, mutual accountability agreements between stakeholders. This is a political process, and we're just taking it on. We're not hiding behind any kind of other, jargon. This is a political process. So, and the idea is that we set time-bound and locally determined, locally prioritized, locally relevant goals, targets, and milestones. And we do that in an agile method. So right now, I'm talking about it as round one being between now and 2020, round two, 2021 to 2025, and round three, 2026 to 2030. Now, that might change if there are national development plans or local development plans that are on different time horizons. I think that's fine. It should be adapted to what is locally relevant. And the key thing is that this has to be done based on the political and cultural context. And the compacts have to be written in a way that's going to work in all that kind of complexity and variability that we know is out there. So it's a flexible, hopefully it'll be flexible. The compacts are designed, and the formula is political will plus data plus funding equal aligned action for impact. And we're proposing to create a certification process where the compacts could be certified as, depending on what their state of development is. The idea is, like, we want to go from, I'm advocating to go wide, get a large number of compacts in, and then everyone is like on the road to sustainable development, and then they can be on the journey to victory. So, like, I'm not as concerned right now about the quality of the compacts in the first round. I'd rather use this as a tool for engagement and education and enrollment into, we can do something, let's go. And then we can have a, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, or whatever kind of road to sustainable development people want to create. And also, I mean, there's discussions that I'm having about the certification process, which are, what do we do if a national government doesn't support sustainable development? Will we still offer certification? And we don't have any answers to those questions. We need help figuring that out. I talked to the Minister of Planning in Ghana, and I said, if you guys roll this out nationally, then why don't you create a Ghanaian peer certification process? And then we can all learn about how you do that in Ghana. Same thing in Kenya or Nigeria or elsewhere. So I think there are countries where the national government is not going to move and local level do want to move. So we have to figure out how to allow that to be certified. Even in the United States, that would be true, right? There are cities ready to move on SDGs, but the national government isn't going to get involved right now. So we have to enable that and empower that. It's a political opportunity to figure that out. So next slide, who participates? We're focusing on, next slide.
Yeah.
It's coming. Okay. We're focusing on cities and local governments. That could be districts, counties, municipalities, whatever works in the political and cultural context of the countries that you're working in. The idea is to align the actors, the stakeholders, the governments, the private sector, and civil society. We also want to see engagement with investors and entrepreneurs and innovators, that young generation, those tech, those techies, if you will, those women groups that are coding now. We need all those kind of like next generation. What do they call generation millennials or whatever?
Yes.
Generation X, Y. I can't.
Y.
X, Y. Okay, yeah.
No, just Y.
Y. Generation Y. Okay. Thank you. You're so modern.
I share an office with one.
Thank you. So we're actually exploring this everywhere in all 193 countries that have been signed on to the SDGs. And I also want to say we think this is potentially applicable in places where people are dealing with refugees or responding to natural disasters and humanitarian responses. We're in an early stage dialogue with some folks at FEMA looking at Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. I'm going to Amsterdam to talk to the Netherlands government because they have influence over some islands. Like, wouldn't this be a great way to start your recovery and reconstruction by using an SDG compact methodology and really ensuring that it's a community-driven and locally led? I'm really worried about that, frankly, for Puerto Rico. And so there's some movements that I've been trying to tap into to bring this as an opportunity now, hopefully when they start shifting into recovery and reconstruction. Next slide. Okay.
Oh, there he is.
So our next steps is that I've been thinking and working and dialoguing and connecting with people about this. I know that's okay. Yeah, sorry, I was jumping ahead. So we're working on this concept, and we're trying to figure out what are the incentives. So again, I welcome your feedback on that. We have investors, financial institutions, and civil society on the left-hand column, and then we have stakeholder gets. So on the bottom left corner, what would civil society get? Well, they would get a clear understanding of what the local government priorities are. They would also have a seat at the table and influencing what those priorities would be. And they would get multi-stakeholder commitments at that local level, and they would have a framework for mutual accountability. And then in the context of the second two columns, I have to work on this table. It's like a little bit hard to, the key is the local government. So what are they going to give? And then what are they going to get? So the investors they want to invest in a geography that is on the road to sustainable development. Their money will get a better ROI and they'll succeed. The local government would give recognition to their commitment to sustainable development, and they potentially can get investment to streamline into the local priorities that they have. They would also get certification, and the theory that we're working on is that new investments might come that would otherwise not come, and potentially with lower interest rates and better investment terms. That's the theory. So if you have a certified compact, you can negotiate for more favorable terms. Financial institutions would get these commitments to the SDGs, and they would be able to, the government would be getting these new investments that I said. So that's sort of an early stage kind of thinking about the incentives. Again, we need to do more work on that, and we need to think that through. And we're trying to figure out, like, operationally, how do you make that work? So I'm going to come to that in a minute. Next slide. So just quickly on next steps, how am I doing on time?
Pretty good. We could probably wrap it up soon.
Okay. So I'm working with an organization called the Global Development Incubator. They actually have offices in this building as well.
And they are a member of this movement.
Oh, they are. Beautiful.
Yes. They were a founding member 2 years ago.
Really? That's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that. They've agreed to help incubate and develop this idea. I thought they were in the right place to start with because they're an incubator.
Yeah.
They build big, bold ideas, and they're not attached to them. And they're a neutral platform. So everyone can figure out if and how they want to engage. So I'm really excited that they're working on it. They have offices in the United States and Nairobi and in Hong Kong. So, and they're affiliated with Dahlberg Global Development Advisors. So they have a broader Dahlberg network that they can tap into. And they're really good at building big things and then either hatching them, or if it doesn't work, they kill it, or it can go into another institution. So that's their role as an incubator. We're trying to identify trailblazer cities and local governments. So this is my invitation to you all and the people on the phone that are at the country level. If you have a local government that there's a charismatic leader, or there's already a multi-stakeholder kind of network that's understands the SDGs and they're ready to move, then let's see if we can enroll them in this possibility. I've also been talking with, in the SDG ecosystem, there are people with they're only focused on gender, or they're only focused on, climate, or whatever or smart cities or whatever. And that's all fine. And so the invitation to those folks is if you guys want to be the tip of the spear and you want to move your gender agenda, that's fine. You can enter into this compact process with, a tip of the spear. And you can build it out if you use food security and nutrition or hunger, goal 2. Fine, let's use goal 2 in if that works for those communities. But then we still have the whole goal framework, so you can evolve it and evolve that dialogue over time. We're trying to identify core implementation partners. Many of these things that get created, these multi-stakeholder platforms or partnerships, they start off with trying to get 1,001 mothers to sign on, and we're not doing that. We want to work with people that want to put skin in the game, and we want to create agreements of what everyone's going to actually do to advance this agenda. This is not just throw your name on and then we'll see you in 5 years. This is going to be, we want to work together. We want to figure this out together. We want to activate and mobilize ourselves together. So we're trying to figure that out as well. We have some key design features. I don't really have time to go through them all, but if we can fast forward, there's a couple slides I do want to show. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So we're doing a deep dive on the data revolution. You can see that. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, pause. So what I want to say here is that many governments are now starting to publish and as their national responsibility a national reporting platform, an NRP, where they're reporting on their baseline data. There's about 6 or 7 countries that are now doing that. Only 6 or 7 out of 193. So that's sort of the bad news 2 years into this. Okay, so the good news is that the US was one of the first countries, by the way. When I was in the State Department, we worked really hard. We got that up September 2016, 1 year later. It's hard work. It's really hard work. They're now doing a second data call, and they'll be updating the data with new data and adding more indicators in the next month or so. So it's alive and kicking within the US government. The good news is the top line here, which is that there's now this thing called the SDG National Reporting Initiative. And it's the Center for Open Data Enterprise, got a grant from the Hewlett Foundation, and they're now supporting countries around the world to establish national reporting initiatives. So please, if you have contacts that, in your national governments that want to do reporting, that is a resource that's now available. And please signal demand, more demand, the better. They're already overwhelmed with demand. So it's good. So that's cracking open. Next slide is now what's happening is, and this is where remember I said the localization of the SDGs is becoming a priority. This is here in the United States in San Jose, California. they're working on looking at their environmental sustainability plan, their smart city plan, and their My Brother's Keeper initiative, which is a social protection initiative, and trying to then link that into the SDG framework. Next slide. Pause.
It seems to take about 5 seconds per slide because my
Yeah.
little computer's doing too many things.
I want to just share. So what's happening now that the national reporting platforms are happening, now there's a second wave. And this is like what is exciting and real that links to what you're all doing in the movement for community-led development, which is now we're starting to see local reporting platforms, local data dashboards, and a toolbox of apps and solutions that can be applied and used by local stakeholders to help constituents realize their local prioritized goals. So this is happening in California right now. They're doing this in Palo Alto, San Jose, and San Francisco, but it's also happening in Kenya. There's groups in, Al Kags from the Open Institute is working on a local platform in Lynette Province, and it's happening in many, many other places. So there's like a groundswell of people trying to develop these platforms. So that's on the data side. That's a good thing, and we're excited about that. My last slide is the next one, and then I'll stop. I just wanted to show you, some of our early thinking about how to link this to money, because we're trying to, going back to that incentives thing, we're looking at how can everyone knows that in the development finance world, to go from billions to trillions, we have to leverage the private sector, and we have to leverage private sector investment. But we have to stay true to our values too, So we're trying to figure out, we have to create the rules of the game in a way for blended finance and for development finance going forward. And so we're saying, if local governments are in a compact, they're on the road to sustainable development, then they are going to need to raise money to be able to build their infrastructure, to be able to achieve the goals. So those cities or local governments with a certified compact will then be in a position to negotiate it with banks and investors to get, to issue mutual bonds or other kind of blended finance instruments. And the compacts will be part of the rating systems that occur. There's all these rating systems that happen around social impact bonds. And then there's monitoring and auditing of what's actually happening with the money that's put in through the municipal bonds. So the idea is that the compact certification and review process could be weaved into that as well. So we're talking to investors, we're talking to the World Bank, we're talking to the UN Community Development Fund. All these folks are interested in this, and we're trying to figure out how to, work together with everyone to develop these compacts. So that is just, just the last slide on the financing stuff. Obviously, I could go on, but I'm going to stop there.
Great.
And welcome your feedback now or anytime going forward.
Anyone on the phone have a question or comment? Since you're also nicely muted, you would need to unmute to say something. You're also tech savvy that you're well muted. Any questions here in the room?
Hello, John.
Yes, hello.
Yes, I have a question.
Please go ahead, Louisa.
SDG Compact. Okay, the presenter mentioned that when the national is not ready on the implementation of the SDGs, then the state or local governments that are ready can be engaged with. For us here in Nigeria, I think this will be a problem because the state is under the national as well as the local government is under the state. For example, we had an advocacy visit with the state where I work, and the state is saying that they don't have a national plan, action plan on the SDG, so they are still waiting for the national. In such a situation, how will the state engage on the SDG Compact 2020 without a nod from the national? The same thing with the local government without a nod from the state government. That is my question.
What's her name?
So this is Louisa from Nigeria.
Hi, Louisa from Nigeria. Great to meet you. I love Nigeria. I've been there many times. I lived there once too, in
Wow.
in Borno State. I don't want to go there now, but I did live in Borno. So I do. I understand your question, and I think it's a really good question. I would say that we're already seeing things happening in Nigeria. For example, in September, Kaduna State issued a SDGs report up in New York at the UN General Assembly. And I will send John the link and he can share that with all of you. It was really, really strong. They took the Sustainable Development Framework and they made it a state kind of agenda for action around the SDGs. So I would say start where there's already demonstrated leadership at the state level and see if we can connect with the Kaduna State leaders and get them to explore this with the LGAs in Kaduna State. I don't want to be limited to that, but it's more like we have to find the trailblazers. And what I see is that Kaduna State is a trailblazer right now. This was featured at a major event in New York at the UN General Assembly. Amina Mohammed was there. It was linked to a new initiative that the UN Secretary General's office launched. It's a soft launch, but it's called Local 2030. Yes. So I encourage you to go to Local 2030. They just put up the website like last week. It's called local2030.org. Kaduna State is like their, leading light right now. So there may be other states there that are already moving. And I think, even in many countries, if local governments and state governments are starting to move, that is an indication of demand that then will actually trigger the national government to start moving more expeditiously. And so if you had like 5 or 7 states in Nigeria that wanted to move on this, then the folks up at the federal level are going to get wind of that and they're going to want to be part of the party. So I think a bottom up kind of solution is great actually in many ways. The UK had similar thing happen. The city of Wales came up with an SDG plan, and the folks in London didn't know anything about it, and they were pissed. So but I was like, that is so beautiful. Yes. Like that is like such a dream that Wales didn't wait for anyone. Like don't wait. And like in the United States, there are 382 cities that are now implementing Paris. They're devolving the Paris commitments down to the city level. That's going further and faster than it ever would have, now that we have opposition at the federal level. So at the federal level, they're not going to take on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but they're okay with environmental sustainability. They're okay with other aspects of this. So we're working in red and blue states. We're doing this here in the United States as well. So, but we're not waiting for the federal government to approve it.
This is great.
Thank you.
Question at the State Department. You said that the SDG indicator dashboard was instituted at State, correct?
I said when I was at State, I worked on it.
Okay.
It's actually being run out of the Office of the Chief Statistician, which is housed within OMB, which is actually part of the White House.
Okay.
So they have a responsibility to oversee the vast, there's like 232 statistical agencies and programs across the U.S. government. So the system that they've created is a federated system. So they draw on data from the agencies, basically, and then those people are then stewards for that indicator and for updating that indicator. So they are required to, update the thing. And the platform that we developed is open sourced, and so it's forkable or copyable by other countries. So you can quickly do it. The work is getting all these people to put the right data in and curating that data. So it's actually run out of the White House.
Okay. So we'll share, as Paul said, we'll share the slide deck, the notes, the recording of this. And I think it's it really reminded me of a earlier initiative called Citizen Charter that started in the UK and it exists now in Afghanistan and Bangladesh. Really, it was a public-facing charter that local government would make, but it's to do it, so it's a similar concept, but in the context of the SDGs. So it's this could be a really great piece of our whole advocacy portfolio, which will be